So imagine that you've been reporting on revenue numbers, transaction numbers, and then the next thing you know, you have zero.
Where is it that we find the data that tells us we're having success or not?
You think you might be doing a great job dotting your I's, crossing all your T's, but it literally just takes one little update or one little thing to miss, and it'll break your analytics.
As marketers, we need to be able to have a story to tell. There has to be kind of a narrative, right?
It all comes down to, talking to your sales team, getting buy-in. These are all communications, that you need to have regularly and proactively, especially the education part, so that no one's surprised. Welcome to the Small But Mighty Marketing Podcast. I've got Josh, Becerra president and co-founder of Augurian, and myself, director of marketing here. And I'm really excited about today's conversation, today's topic.
Yeah, it should be a good one.
We're going to be talking about analytics today.
Yeah.
And yes, it might sound boring, but it really is.
Analytics isn't boring.
I mean, I guess it depends on who you talk to.
Yeah.
But if you're listening or watching this, if you're feeling confused or overwhelmed a lot of times when you're thinking about your analytics,
Yeah.
and if making sense of it all feels like another full-time job, because it could definitely feel that way. I mean, we're going to be diving into this. This whole episode is going to be talking about that, getting more clarity around your analytics. And instead of feeling like your data owns you, we want to change the relationship.
Nice.
And have you own the data that you're currently getting. So,
I like it.
So that's really the purpose of today's episode today. And so if that sounds like you, let's change that relationship so you can lead, you can grow, and you can level up in your organization with confidence.
Yeah. Own your data. Don't let it own you.
There we go. So let's get into it.
All right.
So I wanted to kick it off first with something we've been experiencing recently with some of our clients, specifically e-commerce clients. So,
I know what you're about to say.
Yeah. So the Shopify has rolled out a new update that they're really pushing all their websites and the people that own websites to update. And it's related to their shopping cart.
Sure.
And so what ended up happening was that it actually broke e-commerce analytics. So imagine that you've been reporting on revenue numbers, transaction numbers, and then the next thing you know, you have zero. That's what's happening right now.
Yeah.
And they're forcing people to make this update. So
yeah, without a lot of information about hey, when you make this update, it might break your stuff. So that's never good.
Yeah, that's a problem. And unfortunately, this is pretty common.
Yeah.
Where companies like Shopify or platforms like Google, they will make updates and it will break things.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you guys that are listening to this have experienced this multiple times. And so I want to talk a little bit about the impact of these software updates, platform updates, or even site migrations, because I would consider that as a pretty big update.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, Josh, have you experienced or heard a lot of these kind of horror stories that come from these?
Yeah. So there are the platform updates like Shopify, and I think that is something to be aware of. Sometimes the platforms are good at letting people know, so you're paying attention. We kind of caught this. Dug into it, understood it, and then went to all of our different clients who are on Shopify to say, hey, have you made that update? If you're going to, we need to make sure that these things don't break and fix them right away. So platform updates happen, and sometimes stuff gets broken, and sometimes they're great at communicating about it, and sometimes they aren't, and we have to play catch up. But with the site migrations, that's a whole nother story. And you asked the question, do I hear about this stuff? I mean, basically when somebody's migrating their site, I get three kinds of phone calls. One is hey, we're going to migrate our site in 12 to 18 months. We wanted to understand what the implications are of that, maybe get into a partnership so that we can kind of ride alongside that process to make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. So that's the first kind of call I get. The second kind of call is, hey, we're in the process of migrating our website. We're going to launch it in a month and we need your help. And that's kind of more of a all right, the alarm bells are kind of going off. Man, we got to do a lot of catch up and try to figure out where they're at, what they've done, inform them on where they might be missing. And sometimes that means we're advocating to push launches back, because it takes some time to make sure that when you do make that migration, that you're not losing all your data, or that you won't be able to have a good year over year comparison. And so that's the second kind of call. And then the last kind is my hair is on fire. We just migrated our site. We lost all of our traffic. We have no reporting. Like, we need help right now. So avoid that at all costs. I don't like receiving those phone calls. It's really hard on our team. It's hard on in-house teams. Being planful around site migrations and your data is super important.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty insane. So I've been part of a lot of different migrations,
Mm.
and the more you want to change, like for example, you want to change everything from the brand name to which is going to change the website, all the
Yep.
website URLs. You're going to change the design, the functionality, even the tech stack. I mean, usually the analytics issues will come from URL changes because it's going to affect your ad URLs. You're going to have to make sure those get updated.
Yep.
But then there's also when you bring in new tech stack, they do have different settings,
Yep.
different configurations
Yep.
that don't talk the same way as the previous platforms that you have. And so you think you might be doing a great job dotting your I's, crossing all your T's, but it just takes one little update or one little thing to miss
Yeah.
and it'll break your analytics. And it is a very stressful time. So I've seen some companies that will try to save on costs, but if you think about all the checklist items that analytics has to look at, the PPC paid media teams have to look at, SEO teams, web developer, it's a laundry list
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
dos, and it's very important that you staff properly to avoid that high risk scenario where you're done with it and you have traffic is zero,
Yeah.
revenue is zero or something like that. Even if it truly isn't, imagine walking into into a stakeholder meeting and talking about the situation that you didn't address
Yeah.
before that.
Yeah, no, you never want to be in that situation for sure. And I would just say, like, it beyond like URLs changing, tech stacks changing, even like design choices that are happening in the migration process, you might end up with like different calls to action. The designer might be like, "Hey, let's try this new button over here," or "Let's redesign these forms." And when that happens, if we're not saying, okay, that form is replacing this form so that we can do comparisons, or that like CTA is replacing this CTA, now all of a sudden, if we don't do those things, we're like either not tracking the new stuff and tracking the old stuff.
Oh
And
yeah,
then we're
that
like,
happens
hey,
so
what's
much.
happening? We're really down in like our MQLs or whatever. Well, no, it's just that you're actually not tracking the new forms or CTAs. So anyway, a lot of times, web dev shops are in the know about this stuff, but I've had plenty of calls where people are not understanding why is our traffic underperforming after our migration. And half the time, it's just because, like, oh, you're not tracking the new stuff on the website in the same kind of structured way that you were your previous information. And
Yeah.
so you got to connect those dots. Otherwise, your year over year data looks really weird. And then when you're trying to report out to leaders and stakeholders, you're kind of always in this uncomfortable place where you're explaining kind of, well, this is different from this because of all of these reasons. And that just doesn't build confidence.
Yeah, another common scenario in migrations that I've encountered is subdomains.
Okay.
And either they're getting rid of subdomains or now they're going to move certain things to a subdomain.
Yeah.
And back in the UA days, you had to do cross domain tracking. Maybe that's still the case now. And so, if you guys are considering that scenario, you do definitely need to consider your analytics because it might not track properly across the ecosystem or all the platforms or websites that you have.
Yeah.
Because I typically view subdomains as its own website
Sure.
because it usually means it has different experience, different audience, and so forth. So if that's you, definitely consider your analytics setup because you will absolutely need to consider those. And same thing with the site migrations. I feel like I think it's pretty simple having a plan in place,
Mm-hmm.
being a little bit more, I guess, like highball it because almost every single time I haven't been in a migration that everything worked perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right on time.
Sure.
All the checklist items were checked off.
Yep. Yep.
There's always something that just goes wrong. I've been in a migration where, man, the website looked beautiful afterwards. All the SEO was like top notch. We got everything optimized, URLs cleaned up, and then we didn't have the form tracking updated.
Right.
And that scenario is something we went through, and we're like, oh my gosh, like why isn't this converting? I'm pretty sure this is a better converting website.
Yeah.
And it was just a small, simple thing that was missed on the forms.
Yeah, and that little thing like just erodes confidence in like
Yeah.
the whole process. And so, yeah, it helps to make sure that you're keeping track of that stuff
Yeah.
and making sure that you're just really clear on, okay, here's the events and CTAs that we are tracking
Yep.
previously. Have those changed? Where do they live now? How are we going to map back to the previous ones so that we can do some year-over-year comparisons?
Yeah. It's really
But
better safe than sorry in
but
those
like we went
situations.
really deep, really quickly here on like heavy stuff like
Yeah.
site migrations.
Yeah.
I will tell you that I just had a phone call with a prospective client, what, maybe 2 weeks ago, and they didn't have any tracking on their website.
Okay.
And we were talking about starting to do some, paid media and trying to get them going, but they're like, and I'm just like, can we see your GA4 data so that we can get a sense for kind of baseline for where we're at with things and how things are working today? And they're like, we don't have Google Analytics or any analytics hooked up to our website. And I was like, well, why is that? Well, they have a business unit that's in the UK. And so because of GDPR,
Oh,
you
right.
have to
Right.
have like the little banner that
Yeah.
says, hey, this site uses cookies. And like leaders at the time made the decision that like they didn't want to have that banner. And so instead of putting the banner, they just were like, well, let's just not track anything on our website.
Mm.
So they're going through the process now at the leadership level to get that banner in place so that we can start tracking. So, analytics can be like deep into site migrations and
Yeah.
complexity,
Yeah.
but I mean, I've run across like people who just don't even have analytics on their website. So, really basic stuff.
Yeah, and there's definitely discrepancies. Like even so when you're going through site migrations, right? And you're planning on new tech stack, you're going to have to assume that they're going to report just differently.
Yeah.
This is something that I've always faced in the entirety of my career,
Yeah.
is that the numbers you get from one platform almost rarely match a different platform.
Yeah.
And so that really what ends up happening is that causes a lot of confusion, especially amongst leadership when they just say, "Hey, I just want these numbers to match because that means I can trust in what you're saying."
Yeah.
And it's really important that you develop a source of truth. We talk about this a lot here, and it's because it really eliminates this confusion.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And our analytics department is really focused on that because we know that if your leadership can trust your data
Yeah.
and your reports, they are more likely to be confident, and therefore you get more buy-in on a lot of the initiatives that you want to run that you
Yeah.
know will grow. And so implementing that source of truth is so vital.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And like one of the big kind of disruptions that we had recently was the going from Universal Analytics
Yeah.
to GA4. There was a lot of like uncertainty about, okay, how does this data look now in the new GA4 platform? How can we map that back to Universal Analytics? And that honestly is not an easy thing to do. The views of the data are very different. And so having that kind of ability to track back and put together a good event measurement plan in GA4 that's representative of kind of universal analytics is something that I think a lot of companies struggle with. And so having a good analytics team who can really help you understand how to map those things back is important. And I'll just say too, around like KPIs and things like that. I mean, some of the things that you'll hear me railing on all the time and all my LinkedIn content is
Yeah.
about like getting alignment on what your KPIs are,
Mm.
making sure everybody has agreed upon source of truth.
Yeah.
Because when those, and like we aren't perfect at Augurian at this either, but it is something that we're really trying to make sure we have a clear focus on, is like, let's make sure that we understand the KPIs that our clients are going to be held responsible for. Let's align on those things. Let's make sure that all of our tactics and strategies are driving towards those things. And then where is it that we find the data that tells us we're having success or not. I mean, we've
Yeah.
had, recently even where a client has said, well, but here's some data out of this CRM that we didn't even know existed that's showing, these numbers. And we're like, oh, well, we were using this source of truth
Mm.
to tell us that we were having success. And they're like, well, this is what this is saying. So we had to like step back and realign again. And so, that misalignment is something that's super important. We need to like make sure we're solving for, make sure we're asking the right questions, make sure that we understand what that source of truth is.
And how often do you meet marketers that say, "Yeah, we're aligned with the sales team on our metrics"?
Yeah, I mean the whole marketing sales handshake
Yeah.
is fraught with complexity. I do think that companies that are really focusing on their like CRM
Mhm.
implementation
Mhm.
and they're getting buy-in from both marketing and sales, like that helps create a common language.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I would encourage everybody to really like lean on the CRM because that allows marketers to talk revenue, it allows
Mm.
marketers to talk leads, qualified leads, and that helps us kind of bridge that gap or like make that handshake a little stronger.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, so once, if the marketing team becomes really confident with what the sales team or what the leadership is looking at, which is usually going to be sales numbers and revenue
Yeah.
numbers, if you can see that, then you can back your way into, well, can I connect my marketing analytics or web analytics data to your CRM, right? Because ultimately we want to learn, how do we get more of these sales,
Yep.
and how do we map their behavior before they closed
Yep.
or before they bought something or
I
even
was
say
just going to
something.
say, like, and marketers can really leverage these connections with
Yeah.
CRM, right? So we talk a lot about closed loop analytics.
Yep.
And so what that allows us to do is get beyond kind of, oh, we were able to drive this many clicks or impressions, then this many clicks to the website. We were able to drive this many conversions. Well, we can get beyond the conversion with closed loop where we're reaching into the CRM, seeing the sales team's activity, and when something turns into like a closed one deal,
Mm.
now we can attribute that all the way back, connect that back to where did that come from,
Yeah.
and it allows us as marketers then to like inform our campaigns, strategies.
Hmm.
There's connections that can be made between CRMs and platforms like Google Ads that allow you to take the audience, which is closed one
Oh
deals in
yeah,
the
yeah.
CRM,
That's a
and
big
find me more of those people.
yeah.
And so when we're like doing our best work, I think we're able to close the loop for our clients on those analytics. And that really helps establish that strong handshake between sales and marketing. And now we're all talking the same language. Now we're all focused on driving closed one deals.
And it feels really clear in terms of all of your advertising spend
Mm-hmm.
can be focused on essentially farming, gathering these people that
Yeah.
for certain have closed. And so, yeah, that closed loop analytics, getting the CRM to talk with your web analytics platforms.
Yep.
I mean, it really unlocks this whole other level.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, if marketing and sales can align, as we all know, I mean, if you're driving in your car listening to this, I mean, it is a very big point of conversation.
Yeah.
But when you can work and align together, I mean, it's such a beautiful thing. It's
Yeah.
just, you're on the same team.
There's recently we just signed a analytics project with a company. They want to do, paid media, they want to do SEO, but the marketing leader who's new, it's an organization that has been traditionally, going to trade shows. It's in the engineering space.
Sure.
And so they're very much like have a sales team that's like cold calling, reaching out, they're going to trade shows, very
Mm.
like traditional kind of marketing. And she's come in to kind of take them to the next level from a digital perspective. So the very first thing, I think it was super smart, she's like, okay, we have to choose a CRM. And she got on the same page with the sales team and they figured out
Mm.
what CRM they were going to all use and got leadership's buy-in. So now leaders are saying, this is what we're going to use. Sales team, you have to use this. Marketing, you have to use this. So they got that kind of buy-in at that level. The next thing she decided to do was, hey, let's get all of our closed loop analytics and all of our analytics and everything
That's smart.
platforms set up. So we have this short kind of term analytics project to get all of the wiring connected on the back end.
Yeah.
And then in a month's time, we'll start doing paid media with them, and she'll know that we have everything like the measurement strategy, the event plan all set up. It's we got closed loop analytics set up,
Yeah.
and so now they're in a good place to actually start deploying ad dollars where they're going to be able to understand, is it working, isn't it
Yeah.
working, what isn't working, right? So super smart. And I just think kind of that analytics first approach is a great way to think about, marketing from a digital perspective.
Yeah, I mean, so if you're thinking about, okay, I've been hearing about this source of truth, what are the high level steps that I need to do? I mean, first, I think it is that shared common language
Yep.
around the metrics that matter to the business,
Yep.
right? So, once you get that KPI figured out and the objectives of the organization, then you really need to look at your data sources and the platforms that currently give you that information so you can decide how many of these platforms actually support or get you this data.
Yeah.
And then now you can decide, well, what is this a good platform?
Yep.
Should I move to a different platform? Because what you really want when you're choosing a data platform is that it's robust and it can integrate with a lot of different data sources so that it can collect into one place,
Yeah.
again, one source of truth. And it makes it a lot easier to implement in your reporting as well. And once you choose that platform, if that's in the stage that you're in, then you start getting into just standardizing. Okay, now that we've understood the definitions and so forth, we need to make sure we can understand what does lifetime value actually mean. And let's agree on this formula together. Once you get the standardized definitions and calculations, then it really gets into, where you're looking at like EPL or like how you're processing this data, how are you integrating and centralizing. This is where you get into like the data structure
Yeah.
and importing all of that, and then you really need then you're reaching another level where you need a full-time team managing this warehousing of all this data to make sure everything is functioning properly and optimizing how they work. And then you just have to continue to work with your stakeholders to educate them throughout this whole process. And so at a high level, as you think about where you're at as an organization, consider where you are. If you have that shared language, okay, let's start looking at our data sources. If you've got that covered, okay, then let's, maybe it's figuring out how do I choose the right platform? Is it Google Analytics or is it Adobe?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you decide. So that should help you decide what the first step you can take to getting source of truth. I talked a little bit about reporting,
Yeah.
and this is also a hot topic that we like to talk about here at Augurian.
Yep.
And it's really the difference between a report and reporting. And I know you like to talk about this a lot,
Yeah,
Josh.
that's kind of my tagline. We do reporting. We don't just do reports. We do reporting, and I think the basically what that's about is saying I've heard plenty of people come to me and say, our current agency sends us all these reports. There's a bunch of like green arrows pointing up, a bunch of red arrows pointing down, but it's a lot of data, and I don't know, what I should be paying attention to, how to make sense of all this data. Are we seeing success, aren't we? And so yeah, I think where the difference between like sending reports and reporting is really around insights and recommendations, right? And so what we I think need to do as marketers is make sure that we are distilling down what the most important pieces
Yeah.
of any report are. Like, what is it that this report is telling us? What are we paying attention to? And then based on those insights, what are our like next steps and recommendations?
Mm.
Now, the other thing is we have to think about like who is the audience of the report. And so like at Augurian, we'll create reports that are for the in-house team that's pretty in the weeds and they really want to understand in depth like how things are working and get those like very tactical recommendations.
Mm.
But we also will create reports for like the executive level, right? Where it's very much a high level report. And we found that our in-house teams really love us creating kind of a more executive summary that they can then pass on and socialize with leaders to keep them abreast of like how things are going without having to get them in the weeds or have to give them like this like really in-depth analysis that we don't need them or want them really to be like focused on the nitty-gritty. We need them to have buy-in on like the bigger picture and where it's going.
Yeah, I mean, if your dashboard or your report is not driving any kind of action, you have to address it.
Yeah.
When I was early on in my career, right, I was in SEO for a while, and the reports that I was creating was just full of numbers because it made sense to me because I was in the weeds. I understood if this number was this way, then I know exactly where I need to go.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because that was my responsibility.
Right.
But, just like you mentioned, the further away that someone is from being in the weeds or in the trenches of really understanding the nitty-gritty, the more translations that you need to do to for them to understand,
Yep.
because their whole responsibility is to make a strategic decision. Do I move these dollars into this area or this strategy? I don't need to know necessarily the specific tactics, or let's just say the click-through rates or the rankings of this
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
specific keyword or the CPCs of this. They need to understand, okay, is this channel performing better or worse in terms of ROI and how much I can squeeze out of this than a different channel? And
Mhm.
that's what I need to know.
Yep. Or if it isn't, if it's underperforming, why do we think it's underperforming? And then what are kind of our next
Right.
best steps to take?
Yeah.
I do think that, we talk about insights, we talk about reporting. In the end, as marketers, we need to be able to like have a story to tell. There
Mm,
has to be kind of a narrative,
yep.
right? Every year we put together a plan. We have an idea about how we're going to capture leads or how we're going to generate e-com revenue or what have you.
Hmm.
And we need to be able to like tell a story through data about how is that plan actually going. Are there factors that may be influencing like why we need to change the plan
Mm,
mid-course? Could there be internal factors like we have a new product launch that we're putting dollars behind that we didn't have in our original plan? Are there external factors like competitors that are doing things differently or have launched something new? Is our messaging, are we seeing that our messaging isn't resonating
mm,
somehow with our target market and we need to like make that shift? So, part I think of the role of a marketer is to be able to tell that story
yeah.
from here's where we said our plan was, here's where we see ourselves today, here's how that may differ from what we had thought would happen in our
Hmm.
plan. And you got to like have that arc or that narrative as a marketer, because otherwise leaders will kind of get disconnected or feel like this plan, like this plan is failing. And we don't
Mm,
we don't need to get into a spot where as marketers we're put into a position where we're like saying our plan is failing. What we need to be able to say is we're learning from our plan.
yeah.
Like we set out to do these things, we're learning, like the kind of the game board has shifted a little bit
Mm,
and we have to make different moves on the game board.
mm.
And so stories are certainly what we need to try to be pulling out of our data at all times.
Yeah, something that I learned also over time was that at first I was creating stories about SEO and how do we grow SEO and so forth. And then I started to realize, leadership is putting a stake in or a flag in the ground on a plan on a plan, right?
Yep.
On a strategy that they're going to put themselves on the line and say, this is what's going to work. And then I started noticing, okay, well, whatever I'm talking about has to support or tell this leader this might not work in the way that you think it might work. And as a leader, you're steering the ship, right?
Yeah.
And our roles as marketers is to be advisors, really advise them on whether or not their plan is working or not working.
Mhm.
And so I think if you've got a marketing team, of a few people or even a large marketing team, I think it's important to remind them of, hey, these are the overall like overarching narratives that we've got going on. How does what you're seeing in your day to day supporting or not like these initiatives that we have, because I need to be able to tell that story that this is plan isn't going to work, and this is what else this is what we should be doing instead.
Yeah, and I think, making sure that we're not just framing this as like a negative, like, oh my gosh, the plans
Yeah.
never work. It's also like, oh my gosh, like this over here has really started to work.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
we need to double down on this. So I want to actually like reallocate budget away from the initial plan because, oh man, if we put more budget behind this, we're going to like kill it. And so it's not like this, oh, it's not working, woe
Yeah.
is me kind of a narrative. It's more of a like, hey, here is how things have changed. And now we're seeing success over here that we may not have anticipated. And we need to be able to have those conversations about like that learning and be able to then deploy towards other things that maybe weren't in the plan initially, or weren't the biggest investment in the plan initially. And so like not it's not a narrative of like woe is me, the plan isn't working, more of
Right.
like what is working in the plan and how, and we just need to be able to tell that story so we can shift dollars and reallocate effort towards the things that we are seeing working.
Yeah. I mean, again, for all you listeners or viewers, I mean, imagine that scenario, right? Imagine that your team is coming to you with advice with backed by data to suggest this is something that's crushing it.
Mhm.
You can go and be confident in your plan, or hey, we need to shift so that you save the company from going down,
Yeah.
a wrong path. Like that is a reality, and that reality can only really exist when you have analytics set up
Yep.
properly.
Yeah.
And you can get by. I think you can get by without like a perfect analytics implementation, right? If you've got great product and great sales and customer service, that can take you to some distance. But when you're swimming with a bunch of sharks, you need to get an edge, right? You need an edge, and usually it's the learning is the edge.
Yeah.
And learning only happens with analytics.
Yep.
You look back at the numbers to see what worked and what didn't. And that is what ends up creating distance between you and the top competitors.
And it has to be like a trusted source of truth. So
Yeah.
like when you're showing up with leaders and saying this is what the data, you can't have a leader saying, well, that's not what I'm seeing in the data, or that's not my source of truth, my source of truth is over here. Like that just can't happen. We have to have an agreed upon trusted source of truth so that we're making smart business decisions based on data and the insights that we're deriving.
And I'll say a downstream effect of not having a source of truth is that when you see data differences in your reports from different platforms, I can't tell you how many hours I have spent trying to reconcile these different things. When at the end of the day, directionally or in terms of like precision, it's all saying one thing.
Yeah.
But leadership might just get so caught up on the fact that this number is slightly different than this number or different enough. Like think about all the hours and money spent on just reconciling these things,
Yeah.
when big picture you need to understand what that narrative is. And so that's part of reporting. That's part of the source of truth. Like when you get analytics working for you, it's not owning you anymore. You're owning the data when you're in that type of position where you can be that advisor that leadership needs. You can trust in the direction of the data, and you're not spending so much time on these little issues that really don't change the trajectory of where you're trying to go.
Yeah.
And
Part of that narrative too is like we recently had a client, they came in, they were doing paid media, spending a ton of money on like their branded
Mm.
search, right? So they're, this is basically their name. They're paying to show up in Google ads when their name was typed into Google. And we decided with leadership's, alignment that we were going to divest from brand and put a lot more effort from a paid media perspective into non-brand.
Mm.
Well, that changes conversions, right? And so then you get leaders who are saying, well, we were getting a lot more like conversions before, and we were kind what we from our paid media, and we are kind of what we needed to educate them on was the fact that, like, well, we're going after non-branded search. So, people who are converting on brand are already know who you are, they're already fluent about your products or services. And so what we're trying to do is capture people who don't know who you are. And that's harder to do, and we're going to see less conversion. So there's also like these disconnects that can happen where like you set out to do a strategy, you have it agreed upon, but then like the implications of what that means in the data may not be understood. And so then you have to go back and re-educate people about like what the implications were of that initial decision. Of course, we want to try to like nip that in the bud from the beginning so that everybody understands, is aligned. But inevitably, there can be leaders who are up a really high level, and then they just show up and say like, that number was this in the month of May, and in this year the month of May looks like this. What's going on? Why are we down? And there's answers, there's a story, there's a narrative behind all of that. So
Mm.
um we also have to just always be kind of one step ahead of the game when it comes to like storytelling and education, so that leaders are bought in and they're continuing to understand the the changes, the trade-offs in some of the changes in strategy that we might be recommending and making.
Yeah, I mean, as I'm listening to you, I mean, I really find that, or I'm realizing or thinking that analytics really is a communication tool at that level, right? Because you need the analytics to be able to communicate effectively, assuming you're getting results and yada yada yada.
Yeah.
But we talk about communication in a previous podcast, but it all comes down to, like talking to your sales team, getting buy-in. These are all communications,
Yeah.
that you need to have regularly
Yep.
and proactively, especially like the education part, so that no one's surprised.
Yeah.
In those surprises, you talked about, hey, a strategic shift might have happened, and that's why conversions aren't coming out the same as it did prior.
Yeah.
There's also some other issues that, or some other scenarios that cause these situations, and that's when things break afterwards,
Yep.
and there's these, um, and it happens to everyone, no matter what setting or what team you have, and that's where just analytics issues just come up, and all of a sudden you're no longer getting data,
Yeah.
and that is a nightmare when you don't fix that right when it happens.
Yeah.
I've been in situations where it went on for way too long, and then having to report on something like this, and there's no way you can explain the gap other than this was a human error.
Yeah.
We didn't catch this sooner. That is a very hard conversation to have, because I mean, the relationships that we have with all of our clients, it's with trust.
Yep.
And if that happens in any month, you have to assume some of that trust was broken, and you're going
Sure.
to have to really earn that way back. And so once you've got, let's just say you've got your source of truth, you've got your reporting, you have to assume something might break at
Yeah.
some point, and you need to have a process that catches that. And I know that, Derek Turner, he's a VP of operations here, and he shared with us this anomaly detection
Yeah.
that we're doing for all of our clients. And it's because of that pain, I think, of, hey, all of a sudden we're not getting anything coming from like paid media or from SEO or whatever channel that I know you care a lot about.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's just catch that right when it happens.
Yeah.
And so I was like, this is brilliant. This is going to save so much headaches, but it's also the flip side, right? You can also catch anomaly detection on the upside.
Mhm.
All of a sudden you have maybe a referral source that is catching fire.
Yeah.
It's telling you something. There's opportunity there. Let's strike while the iron is hot. And I
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, I feel like the anomaly detection is a great little innovation that just is helping our team. And you can choose what those anomalies are. Some of them, you can disregard. Let's say that like how our whatever conversions are down. Well, it might be because it's like the 23rd through the 25th of
mhm,
December. And so it's like, well, most people aren't
yeah,
shopping or doing whatever during those days. So we disregard certain anomalies, but it's really helped save our bacon, save the in-house team's bacon. Just happens a lot where new landing page gets stood up
Yeah.
and a form on that landing page isn't like tracked. And so now we have landing pages on the website and we're not tracking them properly. And so, we need to always be thinking about how is it that either like we're creating new pages or changing things on pages that might be breaking things. And so, yeah, we found that analytics can't be just hey, we're going to pay you for a 1 month project to set up a measurement plan and then you're going to go away and be done, because as it kind of ages, things start to break, things
Yeah.
get added to the website that then aren't being tracked, and now you're just kind of out again with a source of truth that isn't really trusted. So anyway, the importance of like always having your eye on the ball from an analytics perspective is what how we think about it. And the anomaly detection has really helped us, show up and say, hey, we noticed this thing. Can you
Hmm.
help us understand why this change is happening? And many times it's like, oh my gosh, we stood up this new thing or we eliminated that page on our website. Well,
Yeah.
that's where the number one form was. So anyway, all that is to say that like catching stuff before clients has been a real win for us,
Hmm.
helping them say like, hey, this is happening on your website. Did you know that? And that being like a insight that then we can learn from and build off of. All of those things have been important.
I find the anomaly detection and things like that when you catch issues early, it allows you to be surprisingly. It gives you an opportunity to be empathetic to other people on the team.
Yeah.
A lot of times, you would think, oh, why didn't they catch this? Why didn't web devs like catch this or whoever made this change on? We have to, come from a place of understanding and realize these problems often happen because their primary incentive is not necessarily to focus on analytics. Their primary incentive might be I need to create a beautiful landing page that converts well and is fulfilling the requirements of my client or
Yeah.
or my my manager. And that's why in site migrations, for example, like, you need multiple people from different disciplines because they all have incentives that are different.
Yep.
And when you bring them together, then you can make compromises and so forth. Because I will say there are, even in the SEO world, there's a perfect way or an ideal way to do SEO, but it actually adds more time to development.
Right.
But if you don't come from a place of understanding, you'll just be like, okay, why didn't you do it this way? I mean, it's hurting us in from an SEO perspective.
Yeah.
But then you realize, oh, because you have to jump through a bunch of more hoops, you got to build, completely rewrite it in some ways, and that also happens with analytics and
Sure.
when it breaks. And so,
Yep.
I think these are, when these issues do happen, and I'm sure you've all the listeners, you've probably have seen that. Understand that it's just because the incentives are different, and it gives you an opportunity to come from a place of understanding, and then therefore, how do we avoid that? How do we avoid this again?
Yeah, I just there's trade-offs, and it's not like SEO or analytics has to win on everything either. We
Right.
just need to have people understanding like, okay, we're making this choice today, and this is the impact that that choice is going to make or have on the situation. So anyway, yeah, analytics is a complex box.
It is, yeah.
Having a strong partner is really helpful, and yeah, I think people just need to make sure that they have that trusted source of truth,
Yeah.
that it's agreed upon, and we're aligning on what those KPIs are, and then figuring out how we're reporting out so that people are hearing the stories, understanding the narrative. And if you can do all of those things, I think you're in a good spot.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm we've got the anomaly detection and a lot of cool stuff going on with this podcast. Any exciting updates?
Well, we had Laura King on as
Yeah.
a
That
guest.
was a great episode.
That was super fun.
Yeah.
I love having like the in-person kind of interview. So,
Hmm.
previously we're doing a lot of online video interviews, and those are great. But I'm excited that I'm gonna bring a couple of the people from those like online video interviews into the studio where we're gonna be able to do some in person, face to face stuff. So I'm looking forward to sharing who those guests will be here in the near future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining on the pod again, the Small But Mighty Marketing Podcast. This is a really important conversation about analytics, and hopefully, this helps you change the relationship from data owning you to you owning the data.
Let's go.